The signal arrived at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, which was, in retrospect, exactly the kind of hour the universe would choose to announce the end of human solitude. It came first to the Parkes Observatory in New South Wales, where a 26-year-old doctoral student named Priya Mehta was running routine sweeps of the hydrogen line, half asleep over a cold cup of tea. The readout spiked so violently that she knocked the mug off the console, reaching for the printout. The tea spread across the floor in a dark stain while she stared at a signal so impossibly ordered, so mathematically precise, that her hands began to shake before her mind had fully processed what her eyes were seeing. She called her supervisor. Her supervisor called the director. The director called a number he had kept in his wallet for 11 years without ever expecting to use it. Within 6 hours, every major radio telescope on Earth was pointed at the same coordinates, a region of space between the orbits of Neptune and the heliopause, a stretch of void that had been considered empty, unremarkable, and unworthy of sustained attention. The signal was repeating on a frequency of 1420 MHz, the universal hydrogen frequency that every physicist agreed any technologically advanced civilization would know. It was broadcasting in prime numbers first, then in a mathematical language that took the combined computing power of 7 nation supercomputers 4 hours to begin decoding. What they found when they finally cracked the outer shell of the encoding was not a greeting. It was not a warning. It was a number. A single, enormous number, counting down in base 10 arithmetic. In seconds. At the current rate, the countdown would reach 0 in 17 days. Commander Zara Hayes was in the middle of a sparring session at Lunar Base Artemis when the emergency channel opened. She was winning, which was not unusual. At 34, Zara had the lean, deliberate physicality of someone who had been in zero-gravity environments long enough that her muscles remembered the math of it instinctively. Her opponent, Lieutenant Deku Ferris, was a full head taller and 30 pounds heavier, and she had him pinned against the padded wall of the gymnasium with a wrist lock that was making him reconsider several of his life choices. The comm unit on the wall blinked red. Not orange, not yellow. Red. She released Ferris and crossed the room before he had finished exhaling. "Hayes," she said. "Commander." It was Admiral Chen, and his voice had a quality she had never heard from him before, which was the quality of a man confronting something he did not have a category for. "We need you in the briefing room. All senior pilots. Now." She arrived still in her sparring clothes. She was the first one there. The holographic display in the center of the briefing room showed the solar system, rendered in blue light, its planets strung along their orbits like beads. And there, at the far edge of the displayed space, a pulsing red dot marked the source of the signal. A second display showed the countdown. 16 days, 9 hours, 42 minutes, and a cascade of seconds falling like water. Admiral Chen entered with 4 members of the Joint Space Command Council, none of whom she had ever seen in person, and one civilian she recognized immediately, Dr. Yusuf Adami, the linguist who had spent the last decade developing the theoretical framework for xenolinguistic communication. He looked like a man who had not slept in 2 days, which was accurate, and like a man who could not decide whether he was the luckiest or most terrified person alive, which was also accurate. 17 days ago, Chen began, without preamble, because there was no time for preamble. Earth received a signal from deep space. "We have confirmed it is not natural. We have confirmed it is not human-made. We have confirmed that it is a countdown." He paused. "We do not know what happens at 0. The room was very quiet. "What we do know," he continued, "is that whatever sent this signal did so from within our own solar system. The source is moving. It was beyond Neptune when we first detected it. It is now inside the orbit of Uranus and accelerating toward the inner system." Zara studied the holographic display. The red dot was moving slowly toward the sun, leaving a faint trace line behind it like a comet. "How large is the object?" she asked. Chen nodded at the technician beside him, who adjusted the display. The scale changed. The red dot resolved into a shape, enormous and oblong, irregular in a way that suggested construction rather than geology. A rough estimate of its dimensions appeared beside it. 42 kilometers long. 19 kilometers wide. The silence in the room was of the specific variety that occurs when human beings are confronted with information that the human brain is not architecturally prepared to process. "That's a ship," said Commander Ramirez, seated 2 chairs from Zara. "That is the working hypothesis," Chen said. "One ship," Zara said, leaning forward. "Or one confirmed object. We cannot yet resolve finer detail. Our long-range arrays are being pushed to their limits." He folded his hands on the table. 16 days. That is what we have. In that time, Earth's defensive fleet will be positioned along a perimeter at the Martian orbit. All combat pilots are being recalled to active status. The UN Security Council has voted to establish a first contact protocol team, which Dr. Adami will lead. He looked at Zara directly. And you, Commander Hayes, will command the Advanced Scout Squadron. Your orders are to approach the object, observe, gather all possible intelligence, and do nothing. He paused on the word with particular weight, nothing to provoke a hostile response. And if they fire first? Ramirez asked. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then we pray. The days that followed had the compressed, surreal quality of time experienced under extreme pressure, where each hour felt simultaneously endless and instantaneous. Zara ran her squadron through combat simulations 12 hours a day, drilling formations that had never been drilled before because the scenarios they were drilling for had never existed before. She studied every scrap of data the observatories sent down, spectrographic analyses of the object's hull material, infrared signatures, gravitational readings. The object, the ship, was generating its own gravity well, which meant it had either a mass far greater than its volume suggested or a technology that bent the rules of physics in a way that made human engineers weep quietly into their coffee. Dr. Adami came to find her on day 9. She was in her quarters, studying the countdown, which had become a kind of compulsion for much of humanity. 11 billion people were watching various versions of it on screens around the world. Some were praying. Some were rioting. Most were just watching, as though the act of observation might slow the descent of the numbers. Commander Hayes. Adami sat down without being invited, which she respected. I've been studying the mathematics of the signal. And he set his tablet on the table between them and pulled up a diagram. The countdown is not simply a number decreasing. It is structured in layers. The outermost layer is the countdown itself. But embedded within the signal are what appear to be coordinate packets. Spatial coordinates, expressed in astronomical units, calibrated to our own system. He zoomed into a portion of the diagram that meant nothing to her visually but clearly meant everything to him. The coordinates correspond to specific locations. Earth, the Moon, Mars, our major orbital stations. All of our inhabited and operational spaces. Zara felt the cold settle into her stomach. They know where we are. They have known for some time. He turned the tablet toward her. There's something else. The embedded data also contains what I believe is a biological catalogue. I've spent 3 days trying to decode it. What I have so far suggests it is a taxonomic record. A biological record of species. He met her eyes. Thousands of species. And at the very end of the catalogue, appended like a new entry. Us, Zara said. Us, he confirmed. Added within the last 100 years. Based on the structural comparison, the entry was added sometime around 1945. The year of the first nuclear detonation. The year humanity announced itself to the cosmos by burning a hole in the sky. She sat with that for a long time. What do you think it means? I think, Adami said carefully, that we have been watched. I think the countdown is not a countdown to an attack. I think it is a countdown to an appointment. He folded his hands. I think they are coming to evaluate us. The countdown reached 0 at 6:02 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time on a Wednesday morning. Nothing happened for exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Then the sensors screamed. They did not come from the direction of the large ship, which was sitting now at a distance of 200,000 kilometers from Earth's moon, vast and still and implacable. They came from everywhere else. From behind Jupiter's shadow. From the far side of the moon. From points of empty space that had registered as empty right up until the moment they were not. They phased into existence, or dropped out of some mode of travel that human instruments had no framework to classify, or simply became visible in a way they had not been before. The debate about which of those was accurate would occupy physicists for the next decade. What the sensors counted, with a precision that left no room for hope of error, was 4,216 ships. They were arranged in a sphere around the solar system. Not threatening in their arrangement, not pointing weapons at Earth, not charging toward anything. Simply present. A net woven of metal and mathematics, surrounding humanity's entire world at a distance that spoke of patience rather than urgency. They were of varying sizes, most smaller than the great Mothership but none of them small by any human standard. The smallest were 3 kilometers long. They shone in the sunlight with a faint blue iridescence that, under different circumstances, would have been beautiful. Zara was in the cockpit of her Tempest-class fighter, designated Echo 1, when the count came back. 4,000 plus, said Ferris's voice from Echo 2, 300 meters off her port wing. His voice was doing something brave and failing. I can read, Zara said. Earth's entire defensive fleet was 47 ships. She let herself feel the mathematics of that for exactly 3 seconds. Then she filed it away in the part of herself that held things she could not afford to feel right now, and she opened the command channel. Echo Squadron, hold position. No hostile actions. No targeting systems active. We are observers. Nothing more. She switched to the fleet-wide channel. Admiral Chen, this is Hayes. We have visual on multiple contacts. Awaiting orders. There was a pause that lasted slightly longer than the speed of light could account for. Commander Hayes, the Security Council is in emergency session. Our orders are to hold. No engagement unless fired upon. Another pause. How are you doing out there, Commander? She looked out through the canopy at the alien sphere surrounding her world. At the impossible mathematics of the situation. At the 4,000-ship answer to the question of whether humanity was alone. Managing, sir, she said. Managing. For 36 hours, nothing moved. The alien ships held their positions with a precision that went beyond navigation and into something resembling statement. They did not communicate. They did not advance. They did not retreat. They simply were, a ring of alien metal around the sun's family, present and patient and utterly beyond engagement. Earth's government splintered and argued and reconvened. 11 different nations announced unilateral surrender. 9 others announced defiance. The UN Security Council voted on 14 different measures, passed 3, implemented none. Dr. Adami's team sent 47 different signals in 47 different mathematical languages and received no response. The population of Earth experienced 36 hours of the most sustained collective terror in the species' history, and also, quietly, in small pockets, something that was almost wonder. Zara spent those 36 hours watching the Mothership. She was not the only one watching it. But she was, she suspected, watching it differently. She was watching it the way a pilot watches a landscape, not for beauty, not for threat, but for understanding. For the logic of it. She was looking at the way its hull caught the light and thinking about material science. Looking at the faint energy signatures her instruments were picking up around its exterior and thinking about propulsion systems. Looking at the one feature that none of the analysts had flagged as significant but that she kept returning to, a section of the hull near what she had mentally designated the ship's midpoint, where the surface geometry was different. Slightly recessed. Slightly less reflective. Like a seam, or a door. On the 37th hour, the Mothership moved. Not toward Earth. It moved slowly, with the deliberate grace of something that had never needed to rush, and it repositioned itself directly between Earth and the Moon, hanging in that ancient, contested space with the calm of a mountain. And then, from a point near its bow, it emitted a single pulse of light, tight-beamed and precise, aimed directly at Lunar Base Artemis. The pulse contained a message. Dr. Adami decoded the first layer in 40 minutes, which was either a miracle of human intellect or a sign that the aliens had designed it to be decoded quickly. He called Zara before he called the Admiral. They want one person, he said. His voice was strange. One representative. They have transmitted a set of physical coordinates, a specific point in space, 200 meters from the midpoint of the Mothership's starboard hull. One vessel, one occupant, unarmed as verified by a preliminary scan they will conduct, and then, he stopped. And then what? And then they will open a door. The argument that followed lasted 4 hours, involved 37 heads of state, 16 military commanders, 9 scientists, and 2 philosophers who had been included because someone thought they might be useful, and ended when Zara walked into Admiral Chen's office and said, "Send me." "The protocol calls for a diplomatic representative," Chen said. "The protocol was written for a situation we could imagine. This is a situation we couldn't." She sat down across from him, which she had never done before in a meeting of this kind, and the informality of it made him look at her differently. They asked for one person. A representative. They didn't ask for a diplomat. They asked for someone willing to approach their ship alone. She met his eyes. That's not a diplomatic skill set. That's a pilot skill set. If they take you, then we learn something. She said it plainly, without martyrdom. "Sir, every hour we sit out there watching each other, the situation calcifies. Governments are making decisions based on worst-case assumptions. Someone is going to fire eventually, and then we'll have our answer about whether 4,000 alien ships are as dangerous as they look, and I don't think we'll enjoy the answer. She leaned forward. "Let me go. Let me see what's in there." He looked at her for a long time. "No weapons. No comms that they haven't approved. You'd be completely isolated." "I've flown solo in a dead ship in the Kuiper Belt for 11 days, she said. "I know how to be alone." Chen looked at the countdown on his wall screen, which had reset to 0 and stayed there. Then he looked at Zara Hayes, and she could see him calculating something, the way a commander calculates, weighing lives against lives, probability against probability. "God go with you, Commander," he said. She launched at dawn, which was a nonsense concept in space but was what the clock said, and she found she wanted it to mean something. Echo 1 had been stripped of its weapon systems, its combat sensors replaced with scientific instruments, its communication suite modified to comply with the transmission parameters the aliens had specified. It felt like flying naked. She had flown naked before. The mothership grew in her canopy as she approached, resolving from a shape into a world. Up close, the geometry of it was overwhelming, not because it was ugly but because it operated by an aesthetic logic that was entirely consistent with itself and entirely unlike anything human engineering had produced. Human ships were built around function, their forms betraying their intentions. Engines here, weapons there, habitation module, cargo bay, antenna array. This ship was continuous. Its surface curved and folded in patterns that repeated at different scales, like a mathematical function made physical, and wherever she looked she had the unsettling sense that the whole thing was a single object rather than an assembly of parts. The seam she had noticed from a distance was now visible directly ahead, 200 meters from her canopy. Up close it was clearly intentional, a rectangle 12 meters tall and 8 meters wide, its edges defined by a barely perceptible change in surface texture. As she watched, the instruments registered a brief scan, low intensity, thorough, and then the seam opened. Not like a door. Like an eye. The hull material simply became transparent, revealing a darkness within that was illuminated, as her eyes adjusted, by a deep amber light. She could see the interior of a chamber. She could see that it was waiting for her. "Hayes to base," she said. "The door is open. I'm going in." Static. The comms were being filtered. She heard Chen's voice, distorted, saying something that might have been acknowledged or might have been "God help you." Then she eased the throttle forward and flew into the mouth of the alien ship. The door closed behind her. The chamber sealed, and for a moment it was dark, and then the amber light intensified from strips along the walls that pulsed with a slow rhythm that was almost, she identified it with a chill, almost like a heartbeat. The chamber was large enough to hold her fighter comfortably. The air outside, her instruments told her, was breathable. Not Earth standard, but within human tolerance, nitrogen, oxygen, trace elements, slightly higher CO2 than ideal. The temperature was 18 degrees Celsius. They had prepared for her. She suited up in the lightweight EVA suit anyway, because she was brave but not reckless, and she cycled the airlock and stepped out of Echo 1 and stood for the first time in her life inside something that had been built by minds other than human ones. The corridor beyond the chamber was tall, 3 meters at least, and curved gently upward at the edges as though the designers had preferred arcs to angles. The amber light came from the walls themselves, which had a texture like woven material, fibrous, intricate, repeating. Her footsteps were silent on the floor, which had a slight give to it, like firm foam. She walked forward because there was only forward. She had been walking for perhaps 10 minutes when she found the first one. It was standing in an alcove set into the wall, and she stopped 4 meters from it and they looked at each other for a moment that Zara Hayes would spend the rest of her life being unable to fully describe. It was tall, nearly 2.5 meters, and it was bilateral in its basic symmetry, which surprised her. She had spent enough time consuming humanity's science fiction to have built up a set of unconscious expectations about alien physiognomy, all of which the creature in front of her simultaneously confirmed and destroyed. It had 2 legs, though they bent at an extra joint she found briefly disorienting. 2 arms, longer than human arms, terminating in hands with 6 fingers each that moved with an independent flexibility that suggested multiple independent joints per digit. Its torso was broad, its neck short, its head roughly ovoid and dominated by 2 large eyes that were currently focused on her with an attention so concentrated it was almost tactile. The eyes were amber, the same color as the light. Its skin, if skin was the right word, and she suspected it wasn't, was dark, somewhere between grey and green, and had a quality of layered depth, as though you were looking not at a surface but through one. It wore something that functioned as clothing but was indistinguishable at first glance from its own body. It made a sound. The sound was below the register she would have called speech. It resonated in her chest more than her ears, but it had a rhythm and pattern that her brain immediately catalogued as linguistic. It was talking to her. "I don't understand," she said, and felt the profound inadequacy of language. It made the sound again, and then it did something she had not expected. It turned and walked away, at a pace that was clearly an invitation. She followed it. The ship's interior was a revelation of scale and strangeness. They moved through corridors that intersected at angles her geometry struggled with, past chambers that opened briefly into vistas of machinery she could not parse, towers of interlocking components that moved slowly, purposefully, their function as opaque as thought. She saw other aliens, dozens of them, going about activities she could not interpret. Some of them looked at her with what she catalogued as interest. Others did not look at all. None of them moved toward her or away from her. They were not afraid of her. The realization landed strangely. She had not consciously expected them to be afraid, but the absence of it confirmed something she had not been ready to name. She was led through a sequence of chambers that grew progressively larger until they arrived in a space that was unmistakably the ship's center, not geographically, she suspected, but functionally. It was circular, 40 meters across, with a ceiling that opened in a transparent dome to the stars, and in the center of the room was a structure that took her a moment to identify as a table. Around the table were 11 of the aliens. They were arranged in a semicircle, and across the open half of the semicircle was a single chair. A human chair, proportioned for a human body, with a slightly elevated seat and padded back and armrests that a human designer would specify. It was the single most alien object she had encountered since entering the ship, more alien than the walls or the corridors or the creatures themselves, because it was an imitation of something familiar. She walked to the chair and sat down. For a moment nothing happened. Then the alien directly across from her, slightly larger than the others, its movements marginally more deliberate, placed an object on the table between them and slid it toward her. It was a flat panel, roughly the size of a tablet, and when she picked it up, the surface lit and displayed text. English text. "We have studied your communications for 81 years. We do not trust our voice translation for a meeting of this importance. Please respond to what you read on this surface. We will respond in kind." Her hands were steady on the panel, which was the bravest thing she had done in a life full of brave things. She looked up at the alien across from her. She looked down at the panel. She typed, "Why are you here?" The reply came within seconds, the text appearing as though typed by invisible hands, and she read it twice to make sure she was reading it correctly. "We are here because you are dying. And because it is our fault." She stared at the screen for a long time. "Explain," she typed. The response was longer this time, and she read it with the slow, careful attention of someone who understands that they are reading words that will change everything. "There is a process by which civilizations develop. It follows patterns that are well documented across the species we have studied. A civilization that achieves nuclear capability has reached a threshold, a point at which it can either destroy itself or transcend itself. Your civilization reached this threshold in 1945. At that moment you were catalogued and entered into our records as a species of interest. At the threshold moment, a civilization requires two things to survive: time and intervention. The time is needed for wisdom to develop alongside capability. The intervention is required because the process of development does the same damage to every species, damage to the biological infrastructure of your planet that, without assistance, becomes irreversible. Your world is experiencing this damage now. You call it climate change. You have other names for its components. The names are accurate but incomplete. What you cannot perceive without our instruments is the rate of cascade. The point of no return, by our calculation, is 37 years from today." She looked up. The alien across from her was watching her with those amber eyes. She looked back at the screen. "You said it is your fault," she typed. "How?" 200 years ago, your star was part of our survey route. Our ships passed through this system using a form of propulsion that you do not yet understand. The transit of this propulsion through your atmosphere, we did not yet know that species were developing here, introduced trace compounds that acted as a catalyst. Your industrial revolution was proceeding in any case. But it proceeded 60 years faster than it would have. The cascade you are experiencing is partly a natural consequence of your development. It is partly something we created. We came to tell you this. We came to offer repair. We came to apologize." The word on the screen, so small, so human a word, in the context of everything surrounding it was the most shocking thing she had read. She put the tablet down on the table. She pressed her palms flat against its surface to steady herself. She looked up at the 11 aliens arranged in their semicircle and thought about all the fear on the planet below her, the rioting, the prayers, the governments falling into paralysis, the 47 ships that had prepared to fight 4,000 and known they could not. She thought about Dr. Adamy saying, "I think they are coming to evaluate us." They were not coming to evaluate. They were coming to confess. What is the repair? She typed. We can reverse the cascade. The technology is available. The process will require our ships to be in your orbit for a period of 14 months, during which we will introduce specific compounds into your stratosphere that will counteract the catalyst we introduced and accelerate the natural healing process you have already begun. The result will be a stabilization of your climate systems within 20 years. Longer stabilization within 100. There is a cost. She steadied herself. What cost? Your cooperation. Your trust. We cannot do this without your agreement, because the doing of it will be visible from your surface and will require you to allow our ships into a proximity that your military would otherwise interpret as aggressive. We will require your people to understand what we are doing and why. A pause in the text, a moment before new words appeared. We could have done what we did quietly. We did not. We came openly, in full visibility, at risk of being engaged by your forces, because we decided, after 81 years of observation, that your species deserved honesty. We have watched you struggle with the damage we helped cause. We have watched you argue about it, deny it, fight over it. We have watched children stand in the streets of your cities and demand that adults do better. We have watched scientists spend their lives working on problems whose scale exceeded what any human civilization could solve alone. We decided that you deserved to know you were not working alone. Zara Hayes sat in an alien chair at an alien table inside an alien ship, surrounded by creatures whose biology and history and culture were as incomprehensible to her as hers were to them, and she felt something shift in herself that she would later describe, inadequately, as the sensation of a door opening. She typed one more thing. Give me something. Give me something I can take back to them. Something that proves what you're saying. Something that helps them understand. The alien across from her, she had begun to think of it as the speaker, which was probably not its function but was the function it was serving, reached across the table and placed a second object beside the tablet. A small cylinder, dense, its surface patterned in the same recursive geometry as the ship's walls. She picked it up. It was warm. Inside this object is a complete record of every atmospheric survey we have conducted of your world over the last 2 centuries. The data is encoded in a format our analysts have translated into your mathematical notation. It will take your scientists some months to fully interpret. What they will find will confirm everything we have told you. It will also show them, in precise detail, exactly what we did and exactly how it can be undone. We offer this without condition. It is not a bargaining chip. It is evidence of our fault and the beginning of our reparation. Whether you allow us to complete the repair is your decision. Whether you trust us is your decision. We will wait outside your system for as long as it takes for you to decide. She looked at the cylinder in her hand. She looked at the 11 aliens. She stood up from the human chair that they had made for her because they had been planning this meeting for a long time and they had wanted her to be comfortable, and she said, out loud, into the amber light of the ship's heart, because it seemed to matter. I'll take this back. I'll tell them everything. She paused. I don't have the authority to speak for my planet. The speaker made a sound, and below the frequencies she could name, she thought, she could not be certain, but she thought, she heard something like understanding. We know, the tablet read, the last words appearing as though the speaker were typing them while looking at her. We do not expect one person to speak for a species. We expect one person to begin the conversation. The return flight was the loneliest she had ever made. The door opened again as she approached it from inside, and she walked back through the amber corridors that curved like the inside of something alive, past the aliens who did or did not notice her, through the hangar chamber, into the cockpit of Echo 1. The cylinder was in her hand. The door closed. The ship released her. She flew back through the space between the mothership and the moon with the cylinder on the seat beside her and the alien fleet surrounding her world in every direction she could see. The comms crackled back to life as she cleared the alien ship's interference range. Chen's voice, with a quality she had never heard from him before either, the quality of a man who has been afraid for a very long time and does not know yet whether he can stop. Hayes. Report. I'm coming home, Admiral, she said. What happened in there? She looked at the cylinder. She looked at the 4,000 ships arrayed against the stars. She thought about what Adamy had said, I think they are coming to evaluate us, and how he was right about the evaluation but wrong about the evaluator. They had not come to evaluate humanity. They had come to evaluate themselves. To decide whether they were the kind of civilization that could face what they had done. They came to apologize, she said. The silence on the channel was total. Commander Hayes. I'll explain everything when I land. I have evidence. I have data. She pressed the throttle and aimed for home, the blue-white marble of Earth growing slowly in the canopy ahead of her. Admiral, I need you to do something before I get there. I need you to broadcast on all frequencies, to every ship we have, that there are to be no hostile actions. No targeting. No engagement. She paused. And I need someone to figure out how to say thank you in a mathematical language, because I think we owe them one. The weeks that followed were not easy. The world did not simply open its arms. The data in the cylinder was verified by 6 independent scientific bodies from 4 different continents, and the verification process itself took 3 months and was marked by bitter internal fights and accusations of fraud and a moment when it seemed possible the whole thing would collapse under the weight of humanity's capacity for disbelief. 2 governments announced that they considered the data fabricated. One launched a strike against the alien fleet that was intercepted by Earth's own military before it reached its target, an act which required more courage from the intercepting pilots than Zara liked to think about. The aliens waited. Through all of it, through the arguments and the denials and the fear and the small bright outbreaks of hope that appeared in unexpected places, in the form of scientists sharing data at 2 in the morning, in the form of a child's drawing that went viral showing the alien ships as a ring of flowers around the world, the aliens waited with the patience of creatures who understood that trust was not a switch you could flip. Adami spent those months in communication with the aliens through the mathematical medium they had established, building a shared linguistic framework slowly and laboriously, word by concept by concept. He was a man whose entire life had been preparation for an impossible task, and he undertook it with the focused joy of someone finally running the race they had trained for. Zara read his updates and felt, every time, the same thing, the sensation of the door opening wider. The vote, when it finally came, a global referendum that required 6 months to organize and was conducted in the most secure digital infrastructure humanity could assemble, was not unanimous. Nothing in human history had ever been unanimous. But it was clear, and it was real, and it was, yes. Yes, let them try. Yes, we will allow it. Yes. The day the alien ships moved into position was a clear day over most of the northern hemisphere. Zara watched it from the observation deck of Lunar Base Artemis, which gave her a view that most of humanity did not have, the ships moving with a stately, enormous grace into the orbital configurations that the aliens had specified, vast structures threading themselves into an arrangement that looked, from outside, like a lattice or a net or a web of something being woven around the world. They began the process at dawn, Eastern Standard Time. From the ships, a luminescence spread, not sudden, not dramatic, but steady, like light coming through water. The alien compound, the antidote to 80 years of accelerated damage, dispersed into the upper atmosphere in a bloom of something that the instruments on Zara's wrist registered as complex chemistry and that looked, from her vantage point, like color being added to the sky. It would take 14 months. Then a generation. Then a century. But it had begun. Ferris appeared beside her at the observation window. He was carrying 2 coffee bulbs, which he handed one of before saying anything, which was the correct sequence of events. "You know," he said, after a while, "I spent the whole first week thinking about how to fight them." "I know," Zara said. "I could tell." "What were you thinking about?" She considered the question. She thought about the amber light and the human chair and the tablet with its improbable, world-changing English text. She thought about the word apologize appearing on a screen inside a 42-kilometer alien ship. She thought about what it took, what kind of civilization it required, what kind of courage it required, to come across the void and say we were wrong. "I was thinking," she said, "about what it means to be the kind of species worth apologizing to." She watched the light move through the upper atmosphere of her world. And whether we could be that. Whether we could be worth it. And I think that's the work, she said. I think that's what comes next. Not the technology they're giving us. Not the repair. She touched the glass with her fingertips. The becoming. What we do with the time they're buying us. Ferris was quiet. Then, no pressure. She laughed. It surprised her, the laughter, genuine and full in her chest, the kind that comes when you are not expecting it, when something breaks open a space that had been compressed too long. She laughed, and Ferris laughed too, and outside the window the alien fleet held its ancient patient vigil around the world, and the sky of Earth was changing color in the dawn, the most beautiful dawn that anyone alive had ever seen or would ever see again, and Zara Hayes held her coffee and watched it and thought about everything that had not ended and everything that was only beginning. 3 years later, the first human diplomat completed the alien linguistic certification that Adami's team had developed and boarded an alien vessel not as a passenger but as a guest, welcomed and named in their language, a sound that translated, approximately, as one who walks between. The first joint research station, built by human and alien engineers over 18 months of technically absurd collaboration, was established at the L4 point between Earth and the Moon. Its dedication ceremony was attended by 11 alien representatives and 49 humans, none of whom fully understood each other and all of whom were, in the deep and inarticulate way of creatures meeting other creatures across the enormity of difference, glad. Zara was there. She stood at the edge of the crowd and watched a human engineer show an alien the structural diagram of the station's central hub, and watched the alien lean forward with an attention that was unmistakably interest, and she thought about all the years between then and now, the sparring session, and the briefing room, and the red dot moving toward the inner system, and the door opening in the hull of the greatest ship she had ever seen. She had not expected, when she flew into that ship, to come back with an apology. She had expected threat or mystery or incomprehensible otherness. She had not expected to find that the question the universe had finally answered was not are we alone but something older and harder and more essential. When we wrong someone, are we capable of saying so? The alien engineer turned to Zara. It had learned her name, in the past year, had learned several human names and used them with careful attention to pronunciation, and made a series of gestures that the translation device at her wrist rendered as, "Is this structure typical of human construction?" She looked at the station, its imperfect welds and its borrowed materials and its entirely human tendency to solve aesthetic problems by covering them with something reflective and hoping no one looked too closely, and she said, "Pretty much, yeah." The alien considered this. Then it made the sound that, in the 3 years since first contact, she had come to recognize as the sound that functioned as a laugh. She laughed too. Outside, the stars were unchanged by everything that had happened, indifferent and ancient and brilliant, scattered across the dark in patterns that had guided human navigation for 10,000 years before there was anyone else in the dark to see them by. But the dark itself, Zara thought, was different now. Not emptier, and not more frightening. Only more populated. More alive with the fact of minds that were not hers, that had looked at the same stars from different directions and wondered, as she had wondered, whether there was anyone looking back. There was. There always had been. They had simply been waiting, as the aliens had waited outside the solar system, for the right moment to say what needed saying. The work, as she had told Ferris, was what came next. Zara Hayes turned back to the ceremony, to the press of human and alien bodies around the dedication plaque, to the sound of two species attempting, badly, earnestly, with profound goodwill and frequent misunderstanding, to celebrate something together. She went to join them.